Hello, everyone. Welcome to NüYü and HEAL's second webinar on integrating coping strategies into the virtual classroom. I'm Shreya, and I'm one of the presidents of the NüYü Club. And NüYü is a student-led club at High School North that promotes mindfulness and mental health awareness in the educational community. And today's webinar is also hosted by HEAL, a student-led club that focuses on decreasing the stigma surrounding mental health and mental illness. So today we have invited three mental health experts, Ms. Kimberly Harrington Marcus, Ms. Jill McLean, and Ms. Alicia De Lorenzo. Kimberly is currently the Executive Director of Innovation and Personnel for the Mount Olive Township School District, and she was also the former New Jersey Commissioner of Education. Jill is the Director of Professional Development for PureEdge, and Alicia is the Interim Deputy Director for Garden State Equality and a founder of Living. So we'll be checking the YouTube chat for questions. So if you have any, please type them in the chat and we'll address them in our Q&A section. So we're super excited to hear from our panelists. So let's start with a short introduction. Could you please briefly introduce yourself and your background in mental health?
Sure, I'll jump in. I'm Kimberly Harrington Marcus, and Shreya already gave an introduction as to my background, but I have been passionate about the field of mental health and social emotional learning pretty much my entire life. My parents are drug and alcoholism counselors, and I spent a lot of years working at a long-term treatment facility myself, and talking about emotions and the role that they play there, as well as my role as a lifetime educator, and believing that helping students to be able to identify their emotions and the triggers for their emotions, both positive and negative, is incredibly important. When I was at the State Department of Education, I was fortunate enough to lead the work around developing the social emotional competencies, and as a means of helping our education system and our educators to support students. And I'm also the mom of two sons who are 23 and 17. And of course, that is the underpinnings of everything I do, and try to model and work in my own home the same way that I do with students and in my professional and personal life as well.
I'll go next. So I'm Jill McLean. I'm the Director of Professional Development with a private operating foundation called PureEdge Inc. Some of you may have already heard of us. We try to partner with school districts all over the country, Department of Education, also like-minded organizations, really supporting educators and students in social and emotional learning. I'm coming to you today from Houston, Texas. But I'm sure you can all probably guess I'm not from Texas originally. I'm working on my Texas accent, you all, but I'm from Scotland originally. I know it's really bad. The jokes don't get any better either, so don't hope for an improvement as we go through this session. I actually come from Glasgow, which is Scotland's second largest city. My background is really in mindfulness and meditation and mindful movement practices, yoga practices, and I was privileged enough to work with Houston ISD, running a full-time health and wellness program for kids aged K through 12.
Thank you, Shreya, for that introduction. A little bit deeper into that introduction, for me, I have been an educator for almost 20 years in public education, and I've taught across socioeconomic classes. And what I realized in my time in education was it didn't really matter how much money people had or what the color of their skin was or what town or zip code that they lived in. But across the board, young people were struggling with really challenging things in their life. And as an educator, I found that young people were coming to me more often after school or after class, not to talk about content, but to talk about the things in their life that were impacting them in school and in learning. And so that prompted me as an educator to go on and receive my certification as a substance awareness coordinator or student assistance coordinator. And then even furthering my education to become a licensed clinician in private practice, which in my private practice, I have anywhere from adolescence to all the way through the rest of the developmental stages of life to talk about and to discuss their well-being and their mental health. And the journey is not lost on me of meditation and mindfulness. I came to those practices in one of the most challenging times in my life, and realized the power of that and questioned ever since then, about 15 years ago, why we weren't giving children the opportunity to learn these tools of mindfulness and meditation and our breath to regulate ourselves. And so I've really had such an amazing opportunity in my career to blend my passions for education. Now I support schools all over the state, not traditionally in one school anymore, but education and mental health and these tools, and blending that through a lens of centering identities and social justice. So I just feel really privileged that my life experiences have led me to be able to do all of this work under the umbrella of well-being.
Okay, thank you so much for your introductions. I'll be handing it off to Maya and Edward to start our conversation with our first question.
Hello, I'm Maya, and we're going to start off with a pretty basic question, which is, what does it mean to support students' social emotional learning, and why is it important, especially now?
I can start off with that one. So, you know, when we think about social emotional learning, I think it's important to really look at the bigger umbrella of social emotional learning, and those 5 competencies is one component of the bigger picture. And we know that when students are provided the opportunity to connect in meaningful ways with healthy and competent adults, and they have a sense of agency like you all have right now to put on these webinars and to practice the skills that you're really good at and feel like you're a contribution to your community, your school, your families, that kids have better outcomes. And so when we think about what social emotional learning is and how we how we make sure that young people have these experiences, I think it's important that we integrate not only social emotional learning, but identity and agency and connection to community, so that young people can kind of find their way in all of these areas to what's purposeful and meaningful to them.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that because I think what Alicia said is so critical, is that agency, that student voice component. It's what drew me to you all as a group, when I thought you were worlds away from me, only to find out you were my neighbor when I was at the Department of Education, and so much that I've learned from you. And I think that's a huge component of social emotional learning in general, is that this is a partnership, and it's not about it's something just for students or it's something just for adults, or that has to exist in separate buckets. The foundation of all of it is about relationships and connections, and we all crave and need that in our lives. And so I'm eternally grateful for you all, to you all, for all that you've taught me, but also for the many doors that you've opened for your peers and for students across the country and the world with your voice, and thinking about that relationship component. And when you asked why is this so important now, I think now more than ever, right? We're seeing that true need for the craving for relationship and personal connection, whether it's in the pandemic that we're in and not being able to see each other, or I'm a hugger and I am like, cannot wait until I can start hugging people again. But you know, those connects and all of those parts of that social emotional learning umbrella really help us to be who we are. And I think it's not just in the pandemic, but why now more than ever is also when we look at the events and the happenings around us and that personal connection piece. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's someone we know or a stranger, but having that social emotional intelligence to be able to act on behalf of oneself or on behalf of others.
Right. And I think the thing that we've learned a lot in the last few years is that more and more, in order to learn, we have to be supported emotionally. We can't we can't function and sustain our learning process, whether as a child or as an adult, if we don't feel supported emotionally, right? So why wouldn't we start with social emotional learning, right? Why wouldn't we take care of the emotional components of relationships, like you were saying? They're so important and so challenging right now, especially virtually, right? And we know that, you know, some of the things like attention, focus, and memory of the human brain are all driven by our emotions, not by our cognition. So we really want to work with that, right? Social emotional learning is just the key, taking care of our emotions so that we can better function. This learning and this capacity to self-regulate, right, really serves us, adult and child, well.
Right, everyone. And thank you for your answers with that. So, keeping in mind what you've said about the importance of social and emotional learning, what are some steps that educators have already taken to support that social and emotional learning for students, especially during this pandemic and this new virtual learning environment?
I'll start with that one because I am so privileged. I'm lucky enough to work with educators every single day. And so I see what's going on. And honestly, you would be wowed by the flexibility and the versatility of the educators in this country. And oftentimes you don't see it in your own bubble because you're working with the same people on a regular basis. But they're incredible, their capacity to shift their format of teaching from virtual to in-person, from in-person to hybrid models. And so we are seeing educators across the country, number one, prioritizing their self-care. And that's so important because you can only support and give back if your own self is supported first, right? So we're seeing a lot of educators going, hang on a minute, I need to make sure I'm the best version of me today because it's going to take all of me, the greatness of me, to support all of the students in my care. And we're really seeing a huge shift in the way educators are prioritizing how they take care of themselves, and they're doing it in order to support their young learners and their community.
I think this is something too that as we've shifted to virtual learning, I echo everything that Jill just said. And I think, you know, prior to this, educators had done an incredible job sort of reinventing their classrooms, their physical spaces, as well as their lesson plans and working on their curriculum. And they had, you know, young students had, you know, calm corners that they could visit, and teachers were helping them to learn how to self-regulate at early ages and, you know, to recognize their triggers or when they might need just to take a moment, or they were doing brain breaks with, you know, yoga and mindfulness. And so then when you think about what has happened moving forward into a pandemic and we've moved into a virtual space, then we really have to focus in and think about how do we shift some of those techniques, and how do we help parents as well as students at home to learn how they can provide those opportunities within this environment. And so, you know, I echo what Jill said. We have the most phenomenal educators across this country who are searching every single day to better themselves and to meet the needs of their students in a brand new learning environment. It doesn't matter whether it's your first year in education or your 30th year in education, we're all in year one. And so how do we bring those tools? How do we help to take those same breaks? How do we do some stretching with our children? What ways can we provide, you know, besides through the academics and the curriculum component, but what kinds of tools and supports can we provide as educators, but also can we teach our students themselves and or parents to be able to transition this into the home learning environment?
And I would say, you know, one of the most amazing things watching early in the pandemic, April and around that time, was watching educators really center that connection. You know, I often say connection before content, and I'm sure you saw what I saw on social media, where educators were, you know, driving past homes and signs and these parades to just find ways to connect and let our young people know that they care, and even though they couldn't be with them, that they were, you know, rooting them on and there for them. And so I think it started there. One of the headlines, and many of the headlines that I heard when we were getting closer to the start of school this year, was, are educators the new frontline workers? And one of the things that came into my mind as an educator is, you know, educators have always been on the front line. You know, they've always been there looking for the signs and symptoms of distress, and looking for ways to make sure that young people felt valued and heard. And so I think it's just similarly to what Kimberly and Jill said. I think it's just a recreation and getting creative about how we do that now virtually. I know with a lot of the educators I've worked with over the last year specifically, they've asked, how do I keep that connection? So really keeping in mind, like, how do I stay connected to my young people? And some of the things I've heard them talk about is, you know, having morning meetings every morning just to check in and say, ask the question, how are you? Which makes a big difference, right? So just prioritizing asking that question of how are you, and setting up, I saw some amazing Bitmoji classrooms that were,
Yeah.
you know, the wellness rooms with, whether it was Mark Brackett's tools or
Right.
Pure Edge's tools, right? Like they set up these virtual classrooms where young people had these tools when they weren't with them in the classroom to get to the cozy corners or the peace corners. They had it in a Google Classroom, and it was there for them still. So I think those are just some of the really amazing ways that educators have centered connection and well-being, all while probably taking care of their own families and themselves at the same time. So we could go on and on. I think there's a lot of things that educators have done, but those are just some that popped up.
So our next question is, what can administration and educators do to support the well-being of teachers during these busy times? Because as you guys mentioned earlier, it's equally as important, if not more important, to make sure that educators are well and able to teach during these times.
And sorry, could you?
I wanted you just to repeat the question. How can students and administration support teachers? Was that?
How can administration support teachers?
Administration. Okay, sorry, thank you. Sorry, Kimberly.
That's okay. I was just going to jump in because this is something that in Mount Olive, where I am currently, we, you know, really thought about right away, because we recognized not only do we know that educators always put their students first to sometimes the detriment of their own selves, and that, you know, the famous model of the being on an airplane when the oxygen mask comes down, and that we need to help ourselves before we can help someone else. And so in our district, you know, as we moved into these much more difficult times and intensive times, we, you know, saw our educators giving and giving and giving to our students, but we were really concerned about how they were being fed and nourished and cared for in and of themselves. So a couple of things that as an administrative team we put into place, you know, one was just being mindful of time, because time is the greatest gift you can ever give anyone. I think especially in professional careers of any kind, but being mindful that we built in and adjusted our schedule so it didn't look like it did during our physical day necessarily, where we built in some time for educators to be able to connect with one another, whether it was for planning purposes or even just to be able to connect and to talk, or whether there was also time built in for people to take time for themselves and to turn off their screens. In our new teacher trainings and our mentoring programs, we built in components where we are assisting new teachers with, you know, that whole like creating your home environment and how to have spaces that you turn on for when you're educating or you're in your classroom, but you try and keep a space that is personal for you, where you can go to rejuvenate and re-energize and to take a time out for yourself, and it's not composed of all of your education materials, etc. But I think the thing I'm most proud about that we did it as an administrative team is we actually started support groups or small groups, and many of our counselors have participated as facilitators, as well as some of us as administrators. And it's an option for teachers if they want it. We put together materials and sort of an overview of what our program would be like, and teachers could opt in. And then based on the number of teachers who opt in, we had a very high number compared to what we expected. We put together small groups, and those groups have stayed together. And it's not so much about coming together to vent or talk about the overwhelm. Really, it's just to come together and build relationships with one another, to have a safe place to talk, because it's a consistent group of people that you're meeting with, and to be able to learn new tools to take care of ourselves, not necessarily pedagogically or what we're doing in our classrooms, but really just about us as adults and that need to replenish. So it's just been a remarkable program. We started it in the mid-spring, and we have continued to carry it forward. And so I think that those are some of the ways in my district that we are trying as an administrative team to be very cognizant of how we feed our educators.
I think communication is the key here, isn't it, between administration and the educators who are either doing the online learning or in-person learning. The administrators need to understand, I think that the administrators need to understand that the educators need almost just as much support as the students do, right? Because they're putting all their energy into supporting the students. Who's supporting them, right? And they walk out of their own jobs to their own homes and their own families and all the things that are going on with the pandemic. So I think administrators right now, and we see them doing it, they're making a shift in changing their systems and policies to become more supportive, to become more inclusive, to become more involved, to setting up these sessions and group meetings. And really, it's the same thing, isn't it? It's the same vein running through everything of social emotional learning. It's building these relationships so that the strength of that school or that department or that district is just improved by the way that everyone supports each other, right? So it's like social emotional learning for the adult as much for the child. So I really think communication is a big part of that.
I would say, in addition to what was already said, is, well, I could say for me, what I've been asked to do primarily from the summer through now from districts is to take care of and support our administrators, because I just think it was Jill who mentioned earlier that we have to take care of ourselves, and Kimberly again with the metaphor of the mask. So I've been asked so many times working with districts, can you just come in and take care of our folks, give them space to have a moment, not to learn new information, not to add something new to what we're asking them to do, but just let them be, let them breathe, let them, move them through something that will inspire them, or maybe provide them an opportunity to just take pause when they might not have taken that for themselves. So I guess what I'm saying is I've seen superintendents really center just giving people some opportunities to experience what we want our young people to experience, the skills of breath work and mindfulness and meditation, and even setting self-care plans and prioritizing that this is important for you. Sometimes what needs to be said is that it's okay to take time to do this. We think a lot about content and academic and what are those deliverables that we're doing, but sometimes all people need to hear is it's okay, and we want you to prioritize yourself. And we're gonna show you that with our actions by providing you with professional development that gives you time to do that. And I think there's two words that come to mind, which is for administrators: transparency, being okay, saying I don't have all the answers, and also grace, right? We want our educators to show grace to our young people when they're not on screen, or when they're struggling to get to Zoom or manage all of these transitions. But the best thing that administrators can do is model that for the teachers, right? So I think that's really important, that grace happens. And then I've seen some districts that I've worked with, they've offered ongoing morning sessions of mindfulness or morning sessions of yoga, because in every school you'll find somebody who either is doing yoga or teaches yoga or has a practice of breath work. There's somebody in all of our schools that is passionate about this work. And again, we talk about agency. It's not only agency for young people, but it's agency for adults to show up and what their passions are and be able to offer those contributions. So finding the people within our school districts that are willing to share and have opportunities for their colleagues and their peers to come together, similarly to the support groups, but groups that are also providing opportunities for them to learn these practices and make them part of a routine. So I think all of those things combined are some really magnificent things that are happening.
Right. And I just want to add on to that, Alicia, because what all of that does, what's so wonderful about all of that, I see it time and time again in the world of education. Not involved in private enterprise, so I'm not so sure, but what is happening is this capacity to build resilience, right? So actually, faced with adversity, these departments and school districts are working together and they're getting stronger and more focused, and that's so powerful to watch. We've seen it as an organization since March this year, and you're so right, it's kind of wonderful. Principals and superintendents all looking for strategies how everyone can support everyone and build everyone up and hold everyone in a safe place, and it's really amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And again, thank you for sharing the different sentiments and the thoughts and ideas on, the different ways to help care for educators and different ways that educators can care for themselves. I wanted to transition, however, to the idea of parents and what they can do during this time to support their children in the virtual classroom, because students have to navigate this on their own. What are some strategies that you believe parents might be able to implement at home that maybe might not be as feasible to be implemented through the virtual classroom from the teachers themselves?
For the parents, I think we have to understand, potentially for a lot of parents, and I'm a mum of a couple of kids. My daughter is 25, my son is 23. So been there, done that. For a lot of parents, they're potentially juggling a lot of things, but they've not necessarily seen their children evolve as students because they're not usually at school with their kids. They don't know how their kids behave in a classroom. They don't know how their kids interact with their peers necessarily, not in the way that they're exposed to it at the moment when they're seeing their kids on Zoom taking their classes. They're seeing them absorb their information and do their learning in ways that they had never ever seen before. And I think for a lot of parents, that can be quite daunting for the first time to sort of see the nitty gritty of education, right? To understand what their kids are doing every day. And I think parents can feel overwhelmed with that too. I think it's important to have conversation, both parents with students and students with parents, right, about what is going on. And I think it's all right for students to say to their kids, to say to their parents, I'm having a bad day. Today, I don't feel the best version of me and I need a little bit of support, or I can't jump on Zoom today, or I feel like I'm struggling with my classes. And it's okay also. I think parents need to understand that they can have those emotions and share that sentiment too, and say to their kids, I would love to help you more, but I don't understand what it is you're doing, what it is you need. Can we make a plan for you? Can we make an appointment with your teacher or the counselor? Having these conversations and understanding that they are 100% normal with or without a pandemic is just such a good way to go. We've just got to be so open to be flexible and a little bit vulnerable in all of this, right? Parents and kids alike, and that's helpful for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so important. One of the most important things that a parent can do, and sometimes for us it is hard as a parent, is to just be present, be fully present with your children, and just to listen, because what you might, or to ask even, and then listen, because you might be seeing something, a behavior, or maybe you're thinking that your child's not interested in education or taking it seriously, or they seem like maybe they're not giving 100%. And instead of maybe just assuming that you understand what's behind that, that they'd rather be playing their video games or, doing something else, really asking the question, and building opportunities, whether it's around the dinner table or I know that's not possible for everyone in terms of working parents and relationships, but finding those times and those spaces to have open conversations and to ask the question, can you tell me more? I see that, you would rather be playing video games than attending class, tell me what that's about. And maybe they'll tell you that they just want to spend time with their friends. And, in or out of pandemic, that's probably true, but there may be a real need for that now that's different than before. Or, they may be able to tell you that, like, they're just can't be on the computer anymore, and so they're just having a hard time being motivated. Or there may be positive things that they tell you too, but I think that the more you are open and inviting and asking questions about what you observe and see, and providing that space and just being present to really truly listen and not jump in with a solution or an answer, that's really a tremendous gift that I think parents can give. And Alicia said it before about something that administrators can do with teachers. And I think the same is true of parents, is to give yourselves permission. And Jill just talked about that, giving yourself permission to not always be okay or have all the answers or know how to help with the math homework, but to, again, build that relationship and that vulnerability, that transparency, to be honest about where you're at as well, and giving permission and passing on that permission to your child, that they are going to be experiencing highs and lows, and how can they start to talk that out with you, and to trust you with those emotions, so that you can give them that safe space and then the support that they might need to get over a hurdle that they're encountering.
I think everything that was just said was almost everything that I had in my mind to share. I want to say and be 100% transparent. I'm a parent in this with an 11 and 6-year-old, and this is tough stuff, and so that permission is really important for us as parents to be able to say, this is hard and I don't have all the answers and I'm going to mess up. And one of the most important lessons that I've learned as a parent is it's okay to mess up, and it's okay for our children to see us mess up. What's important is for us to do the cleanup, right? So when I am on a Zoom call and I have one of my kids, run through my office and, is not aware of what's going on for me and is, loud and dropping things or whatever's happening, notice that, maybe I am triggered, or maybe I react to that, or I fly off the handle, and being able to just clean that up with my kids. There's research out there that talks about apologies and how so many kids don't know how to apologize because there's not really great models for apologies. A lot of times adults don't think that they have to apologize to children. And so kids really don't have a good model for how do we apologize when we mess up. And also, when we think about apologies, when young people do try to apologize, sometimes the narrative that adults have with young people at that point is more punitive, right? Like we go right into like, well, that wasn't an apology, and next time look me in the eye or do it better. And so who the heck wants to ever apologize again, right? Like, because I don't want to feel that way after an apology. So I think as parents, like, let's mess up, right? Because we're going to. Let's not hold ourselves to this standard that we have to do this perfectly. Throw out plan A, to come together with plan B and find some ease in that. And even maybe some fun or some joy, right? Because we are not going to get this right. There's no real good plan book for this. And I think it's just really important for parents, at least to just acknowledge how important that is. And then also to remember that self-care isn't selfish. As a parent, I sometimes feel guilty about taking time away from my kids when I'm working, but then in addition, taking time away from my kids to go and go to an acupuncture appointment or go do yoga or my breath work practice. And then I realized when I'm done with those things, I'm a better parent. So it's not selfish for us to make sure that we are caring for ourselves, even though in the moment, if any of you are like me, you feel like
Yeah.
with guilt about it. I show up as a much better parent when I take time to practice away from my kids. Like, it's okay to have space and time away from our children, and it's hard right now. But even if it's a moment in your room or a longer shower, just to be mindful in those moments, it's okay. And it's okay that this is hard and we're going to mess up.
Right. I just want to add, Alicia, you can just be quiet. Not that I want you to be quiet, but the message behind you speaks volumes.
Yeah.
Everyone, I hope, can see, right? That message behind you is just so wonderful and kind of so appropriate for the topic we're having right now. So yeah, that's a pretty beautiful sign you have, or picture you have there.
Thank you, Jill. For anyone who might not see it, it says, listen in such a way that others love to speak to you. And it's a reminder, right? It's a reminder for me. I have that up there as a reminder because it's really important for us to just pause and listen.
Right.
So now I kind of want to transition into recognizing potential mental health issues in students, because really the way to address these problems is to first recognize them and then find appropriate ways to solve them. So what are some effective ways for educators to identify students struggling with their mental health, especially now that we're all virtual, we're over Zoom, and not everyone has their camera on?
So this is a huge topic. I'm trying to think how we even tackle this in the time that we have. I can't even begin to imagine how educators can start to understand the emotions of their students when they can't have that wonderful thing called connection. So much comes from human connection. So much of who we are of human beings evolves because we spend time with each other, because I feel comfortable with you, sitting with you, discussing with you. And when students are putting their cameras off, when we don't have the capacity to have those interactions, body language is a wonderful thing. Just the way people carry themselves and interact with you tells us so much. And I don't know if you can see right now, but even on the screen, the edges of us are a little bit fuzzy. Our eyes aren't as they would be if I was sitting with you. So it is so difficult at the moment for educators to tap into the real depths of how their students are actually truly feeling. One of the best ways, I think, right now for anyone to try and get their emotions down, and it may be that students want to share with their teachers and vice versa, is to write things down. Keep a little journal about how you're feeling. And if you have a close relationship with your school counselor, social worker, teacher, share that information with them, because right now they're seeing you in a very different light. They're not interacting with you on a daily basis the way they might have been. So look at the cat. So I think keeping a little journal of what's going on with you, and sharing some of that information is sometimes good when you get together as classes, to start off with kind of, I know it's Mark's bracket thing, like a mood meter. How are we all doing today? What are you feeling? How are you on the scale? Where are you at, right? Just being really honest right now, because I do think it's harder right now for educators just to have an awareness in the way that they would have when they were with you in person. So I think from a student perspective, try and give some information out to people that you trust and people that you are willing to give your emotions to, because they're 100% there for you. And once they have that information, then their capacity to help you just increases tenfold, right?
Yeah, and I think it's so important, more so now than ever before, is the idea of team, and that we're all in this together, and that it's not an individual responsibility or a time to sort of be in that spot. Because I feel like, to the question, I feel like often our teachers feel like they have to be all and end all to everyone, and that they are hard on themselves if they miss. You ask, like, what are the signs? What recommendations would you give? And I think I mean, I think one of the greatest things is to trust your gut and your instincts because they're so strong. And teachers love their children in their classes like their own children or their nieces and nephews or others in their lives. And I think you begin even in a virtual space to develop an understanding of, sort of, well, when Kimberly's in class, this is sort of, she's often very quiet, or she's this and she's that. And then suddenly, if that looks or feels differently, there's probably a reason for that. And it doesn't necessarily mean there's mental health issues going on, but something is behind it. And so just like the advice to parents of asking the questions and the follow-up and listening, as a teacher, also sort of asking and digging in, and maybe not necessarily in front of all the other kids, maybe saying like, hey, I have office hours this afternoon, like, would you mind popping in? I'd love to chat with you. Or like Jill just said, I saw the cat, your cat wanted to learn more. How do we draw in and build that relationship space where we can have the conversation, and be really keen observers? When I first started teaching, there was the method in place that was called kid watching. And, we didn't have technology, and I was taking notes in a notebook on children and really just watching and observing. And I think, again, we're in that space where we really have to be super mindful of the little things, and not able to always rely on body language, but what is characteristic and not characteristic. And I know for us in our district, we've really tried to do this as a team approach. So, if something is, a teacher's feeling like something's off or is having conversations with a kid and it's just not sitting right, or something's growing, or maybe the student has found their voice and has been able to confide in a teacher about maybe something, a trauma that's happening at home or something that they're going through. How do we collaborate as a team, whether it's teacher and counselor, or teacher, counselor, and administrator, or even some of our local organizations. We've built incredibly strong connections, and they're part of our team as we wrap our arms around our kids right now. And so one of the things we're also doing is we're doing wellness checks. So sometimes it might be, we decide whoever's the most appropriate person. It might be a counselor that a child's had a relationship with, or maybe there's a teacher. Or the other day, it was our principal, our high school principal, went out for breakfast with a student and his a family member, just to connect and to touch in and say like, hey, what's going on? We're really missing you here at school. And, this is a kid, I'm getting teary thinking about it. This is a kid who's not been with us all year, just sort of out. And he showed up for school the other day, virtually. And so it's really a team effort. How do we go at this together to make sure that we're really there and supportive of anyone in our school and local community that needs support. But I think really making sure that, you trust those instincts that are so on spot a lot of the time is really key.
Yeah, I think one of the things that educators are prioritizing is that sense of maintaining connection and trying to keep connection. And I think there's intentional ways that we can do that. We can link that to our assignments and do nows and do those check-ins, not just looking at our students' academic needs, but do they have everything they need right now? And asking those questions for young people to reflect on and write about. Keeping a digital journal where the questions might be, are there any friends that you're concerned about or you've been concerned about over the last couple of weeks, right? So that young people have an outlet to share. I had somebody reach out to me and say, my child's really concerned about a friend who is exhibiting symptoms of anorexia right now, really struggling with what's happening, and this is the way it's manifesting. Who can she go to talk to? And because I knew that district, I knew the person to link, but sometimes young people don't really know who is that person, who's that person
Right.
that I can link to. And so asking the questions and giving young people the space to say, it's okay to talk about this here. And not that you have to have all the answers as an educator, because surely we're not asking you to be the mental health clinicians, but to be that bridge of linking young people when they share these really important things and things that maybe they're seeing that we're not seeing, to the right people who can then support them. So see yourself as the bridge, and it's, there's a revolution happening right now in some ways, it feels like, and I think that's transferring to our classrooms. And so how do we show up in ways that are really thinking about all that is on the table and all that's happening right now, and reinventing ourselves to say, oh, okay, these are questions I can ask, and I know that I can link them then to the services and supports that we have available in schools. So I think just really making space for those questions to be asked, and young people having the space to share about what it is that's going on for them, and then being really intentional, like Kimberly said, to reach out, make time for a one-on-one, a call. Maybe young people are linked with each other to connect weekly and just be able to chat about how things are going, whether it's through guided questions or open forum for them. And maybe there's some way that feedback, if there are concerns for young people, that feedback can make its way back to the teacher to then refer to the appropriate other folks in the district.
Thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts and providing some excellent ideas on ways that we can take care of ourselves and each other during this environment. So this will conclude the general portion of the webinar. So I'm going to hand this off to Kabir, who will take care of the Q&A session. So Kabir, take it away.
Thank you, Edward. So, one sec. So I have gotten a question from the chat. So if you have more questions, please do let us know, because we love those. But we've gotten a question from a teacher who is asking about something that Kimberly had referenced earlier about those teacher groups. And the question was, I love the idea of having teachers meeting together to create a connection. Would this group meet during the school day or before and after? Kind of like how those groups work in your school district and how they can be implemented into their schools.
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to pass it along. That's the best thing about education, right? Is that we all share and get better for it. We have it all different times. So it's based on the small group, sort of their schedule and what works best. We have done some before school. We have been ending our day a little bit early, and then teachers have prep or office hours at the end of the day. So sometimes that will be the time. Sometimes it's a lunch group that meets, and sometimes we have groups of people who choose that they want to meet in the evening. Again, this is completely voluntary, and so it is based on the needs of the group members, and they make those decisions about what they need and how often they need it, how often they want to meet together.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers your question, chat. So next, we wanted to ask a question kind of about how educators can create a safe space for students to reach out virtually. I know we covered this a little bit, but if anyone had, some more ideas on how we can create that connection, as we were talking about earlier.
I just wanted to add one thought that I had after listening to everyone speak, and I think it was Alicia who might have spoken about asking those questions and doing those touch-ins and maybe even morning meetings, and certainly we're doing all of those in our district as well. But another thing that we've implemented is also having like you would in a classroom where before this, where you had clickers or whatever, and you would ask a question and kids could type in an answer, and the teacher could see on the back end who was understanding the content and getting the answer correct and who might need additional support, but the other kids in the class didn't see it. And so we're actually doing those kinds of check-ins with our students of all ages. For our littlest students, sometimes it's done through picture and story asking the questions, and our older students, obviously, we're able to do a different level of connect, but sometimes we're incorporating that as well because it provides a different safe space. Maybe not needing to name something in a classroom or in front of peers or in a space where I might not feel comfortable, but where I might be able to put into that little digital check-in. We incorporate it into slides if we're doing presentations, and then are able to collect on the back end through that particular application that we use, the information so that we can see, if the question is, how are you feeling today, or maybe not something not so broad, but we can see on the back end what people are feeling individually or how they respond individually, or maybe, is there a person who you've really wished you could connect with that you haven't been able to. And again, it just provides a very quick but safe place to put something, because we all learn and speak and communicate differently. We've all grown up in different types of households where communication, is approached on different levels for a variety of different reasons. So I might feel very comfortable talking, and that's my favorite place to be, but somebody else might feel much more comfortable to be able to put it there and know that only the teacher is going to see it, and then they'll be able to deal with it at another time.
And I think it's this, as you just asked this question, I think it is in West Windsor, Plainsboro School District, where there's a platform for when things that young people are writing, they're flagged kind of words that would bring up some concern around maybe what's being written, that immediately administrators get the alert to then kind of check in with those students and put into action a policy that's in place to follow up through that. I think in this time it's really important, because young people might not want to go to somebody and say it, but it may come out in the things that they're sharing through their writing, or the other ways that they're communicating digitally. And so without even realizing, because they're kind of in the moment and putting this emotion into their work, that now this is another way for us to kind of double back and make sure that we're crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's, to watch out for what's happening and what the ways that young people are sharing. So that just popped into my mind. But in response directly to the question about how can educators create a safe space, I think about this saying that a good day starts the night before, right? So in order to have a good day, we have to have a nighttime routine that kind of supports us to get enough sleep and wake up energized. And I think the same is true if we transfer that idea to education, is that in order for young people to feel safe, it has to happen before there's a crisis. It has to happen before this intense moment of emotion or difficulty or struggle or pandemic, right? And so making sure that we as educators are intentionally and have intentionally been setting the stage for us to be there and support young people before a crisis arises, and building relationships meaningfully with young people before their most challenging time of need. And then I also think that it doesn't always have to be all about the negative times where we need to show up for young people, but can we create opportunities for there to be, virtual game nights where it's just kind of open, right? Like, or opportunities like book clubs where, young people may be inspired to join and connect with their peers and adults in the school, talking about topics of social justice or mental health, and bringing people together in that way. So it's more preventative than reactive to maybe a challenge that a young person is having, which then builds that foundation of resilience, because now we're building networks and we're having conversations and we're decreasing stigma. I'm just thinking of all the other fun ways that maybe we can make space for people to come together preventatively and beforehand, so that we've built a really strong foundation of relationships and connections, so that when the bottom falls out and it feels like we are really hanging on by a thread, we already know that there's folks there that are going to catch us.
There's not much left for me to say. You guys have pretty much covered it. I just feel I want to add there's a little bit of adult modeling is so beneficial here. So when adults model for students, and that's everyone in the education system, not just the classroom teacher, but everyone, when they're modeling that they need to self-regulate emotionally, that they have days where they feel highs, incredible highs and incredible lows, and they model that they need strategies to regulate, to get through their day-to-day lives, that they just don't wake up every morning the best versions of themselves. They've got it all together, they've got it all on. Once students see that in their environment, that self-regulation is such a normal thing that everybody's doing, then you sort of take away this stigma, this need that it's a huge thing that needs to be addressed. It's not, it's just very normal human emotions that we all at whatever age we're at feel at some point or other in our life. And once we discuss these things really openly in the world of education, then it just becomes so much easier. Kids aren't then thinking, this is a big topic for me to raise with, you know, somebody in my school district. It's not. It's something that's openly discussed on a fairly regular basis. So adult modeling is good. I think building relationships, building resilience, and talking about belonging, the fact that everyone belongs within that school district or that classroom, virtually or otherwise. When you have that sense of belonging, that feeling of community, again, it's so much easier to have confidence to raise any worries or anxieties that you have for yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so kind of finding that resiliency and finding and modeling that in for our students and for our other teachers can really help, help create that safe environment is what I'm getting from you all, right?
Yeah.
So we got another question from the chat, so I'm going to kind of circle back to kind of what we were just talking about. So the question from the chat is, how do we help students and educators recognize and learn from the resilience they are demonstrating and continue to build it? So if one of you would like to go ahead and answer that.
Kabir, can you just repeat the question, please?
My apologies.
Okay.
The question was, how do we help students and educators recognize and learn from the resilience that they are demonstrating and continue to build it?
You know, this question reminds me of this concept of positive deviance. Positive deviance being, you know, those people that are doing the uncommon things that are actually contributing positively to, you know, an outcome. Say, around, for example, say trauma-informed care. You know, there's people among us that really have the answers. There are people that are connecting with young people in schools, and sometimes in schools we have this tendency to not, you know, to not look to each other and learn from each other. Sometimes sometimes our ego gets in the way of that, and I think this is a really important time for us to be able to drop that egoic self and say, you know, what is going on over there where that person is just finding really great ways to connect with young people, and what can I learn from them, and how do we create environments where adults can learn from each other and recognize the wisdom that already exists in each community. There's wisdom that already is there, that people are already being resilient. And how do we create cultures? I think that's your question, and I guess I'm asking a question with a question, but to to lift up this idea of how do we look to each other and say, well, what's already working here, and try to spread those practices, so that it becomes common, that we all know how to easily connect with kids, and we center young people's identities and agency instead of just a few people, or you know, a handful of folks doing this really well. How do we really just create cultures? I think it's important for us to ask that question so we can move into action of those answers.
Yeah. So kind of in that vein, we got a question from a parent asking like how we can create that kind of good culture and the resources that we have for our parents about, student mental health. So if we were wondering kind of if you knew any good resources. I'm sure Jill has lots of resources as, being part of Pure Edge. So if one of you would like to go ahead and talk a bit about resources for parents as well.
Sure. I mean, I guess our resources are probably more for the educator, but that doesn't mean to say they're not useful for the parents. I think it's really useful for parents to understand what is social emotional learning and how is this translated into the school district, and really what does that mean to their child? What does that actually look like? Because in any way that they can support that same system in their own home, then you double up the benefit of social emotional learning. So it's really for the parent trying to find out what does that look like for their child within their school district, and then tapping into the similar systems, similar ethoses and processes, so that they enhance that. Because what we know now about social emotional learning, it's great, you know, in the school with the students, but now we're seeing that in the community, you start making it so much bigger than just that in the classroom interaction. It's so much larger than that. So you want it with families, you want it with parents, you want it in the community, you want everyone on board. So I think for parents, certainly reaching out to their classroom teachers or the school districts and saying, what does this look like for my child? Because I want to back up everything that you're doing. I want to reinforce it in the same way, because we know that for the young growing brain, repetition is great, right? Keep it simple, repeat, repeat, repeat.
Yeah, and I mean, I've watched lots of the videos out by Pure Edge, and just because they're talking about educators, the practices are universal, right? And so
Right.
as a parent, you know, I could watch those and not necessarily have any background in education and benefit. I think there's other ones as well, like apps like the Calm app, or Headspace, or the Tapping Solution is a great app. So like my kids, I'm a therapist as well, so it kind of helps that I have some of these tools in my toolbox. But I use these with my children. So I use tapping, and then when my kids are having a challenge, I say, hey, you know, have you ever seen me do my tapping practice? Maybe would you want to try that right now? You know, and so it builds my toolkit up, and then I can share that with my kiddos. So I think there are some resources out there where parents can start to build those practices in themselves. And I named a few, but I think also it would be amazing if right now, and I think it's happening more than ever, this partnership with schools and parents to offer, you know, when I think about these practices, we can't assume that educators have these practices in their toolbox. And so we teach the educators so they can have access to them. But then I think if we just transfer that learning over to what we can assume about parents, we don't want to assume that parents have all of these skills or know how to regulate
Right.
themselves. So how do we now open up opportunities where parents and young people and educators, they can come together and practice and learn these things together virtually? Now we can do that really simply. Before, it was hard to sometimes get parents to events because of schedules or whatever it was. And now we really can put it out there and offer people to be able to do this on their own time or together virtually.
And I would just add too that I think, especially if you're a parent of younger children, building your home library or getting books from the library, or audiobooks, there's lots of wonderful children's literature out right now that can help you grow and learn as a parent. Some of my favorite books that have made such a big difference in my life are actually picture books I read to my children on a variety of different topics. But like, there's The Boy with the Big Emotions, or the Breath book, or The Secret to Clara's Calm. I mean, there's lots and lots of just different books out there that you could, you know, start to build that into your routine of reading with your children, and then discussing what that means. Or let's practice the breath, or you know, understanding like that you in naming your emotions, that all emotions, you know, we sometimes tend to label them good or bad, but they're all our emotions, and being able to label them or articulate them about them can make such a big difference. Or, you know, just books that have exercises you can do with your kids. I'm trying to think, I'm pulling a few titles in, but trying to think of other titles, but there are so many out there. And I think it's a wonderful way to learn together with your child and to support your child at the same time with some of those techniques and the ways to identify and practice.
And I would say, I don't know if you all can see the chat, but I put it in there just so I could capture it. But there's a phenomenal book that just came out by Shafali Sabari, who also writes a book called The Conscious Parent, which is an amazing resource. But she wrote a book recently, co-wrote a book called Superpowered, How to Transform Anxiety into Courage, Confidence, and Resilience. And it's really created for upper elementary, middle, through high school. I use it with some of my adult clients because the concepts are just really universal. It doesn't matter what age, even though this book is written as like almost a graphic novel. I read this book with my 10-year-old who has anxiety and ADHD, and we really start to connect over the different topics around anxiety and have these conversations so that it becomes common that we can talk about, these things, and it doesn't have to be kind of shoved down in young people, only reserved for one special person that they trust to talk about, that it becomes common that we just are talking about this. That book is a phenomenal book. My hope is that book gets into every single adult hands that is in connection with a young person. I think it's really.
I would also just add that I know you're asking us the questions, but you all have recommended, the NüYü team and Heal, you've recommended amazing books to me as an educator so that I can continue to learn and grow. So please, by all means, share your knowledge and experience as well, because you know firsthand not only books that you've read yourselves or that you've used in your presentations to parents and others in the community, but also knowing as a teenager, what spoke to you, or what did you find helpful in your journey. So I think you all are tremendous resources for this question.
I agree to that. You guys are an amazing group. And it just leads me to think that, and just to remind everyone that kids are great educators too. We often hear these great stories through Pure Edge where the kids are learning these strategies in school, in the classroom, through their teachers, breathing strategies, moving strategies, resting strategies. And they start to see the benefit in their peers and in themselves. And they're the ones that go home and, mom's had a bad day and they say, hey, mom, you need to sit and take a few breaths. Come, we're going to sit and take a few breaths. Or you see these young kids do it with their brothers or sisters when they're upset. No, it's okay. We're going to do starfish breath. And, we do this. It is just phenomenal to see when children become the educators because they've experienced these wonderful strategies and they share them in this perfectly natural and hugely acceptable way with their families. So parents, when your kids come home with strategies, know they're really pretty good.
And because we're real YouTubers, we'll have those all linked in the description. Wow. After
Go
this
you!
end. Yay, YouTube. As well as they are in the chat, some of them, as well as we'll have some more resources available for those of you who have any more questions. So we got another chat question. So I'm going to quickly ask that before we start going to rapid fire. So the question from the chat is, a High School North from 2011 alumnus here. So how do we incorporate cultural competency into how teachers and administrators talk to students and parents about mental health? I think being able to talk about race in a nuanced, well-informed, and stereotype-free way is crucial at WWP, is the school district reference here, but kind of in general, how we can promote kind of, understanding how background really influences our mental health in general.
This is a fantastic question, and I'm so grateful. Thank you for putting it forward. And again, this shows that the critical aspect of doing this work together, of transparency and of communication. And this is, I think, a real vulnerable space for all of us, and especially, for educators to be in, is, we need to be able to have conversations, but we need to be able to recognize that this is an area that, we need to continue to grow in, and be much more cognizant, but to not be afraid of conversations that might be bumpy or hard, but where we can sort of stumble and grow. I know before there was a question about resiliency, and I think we all can struggle with that and need to learn from it. And one of the things that we learn about being resilient is when we do struggle and we persevere and we come through, but again, we do it together. And we are really recognizing this in our own district on all kinds of levels. So we've put together an equity task force, and we did not just include like the typical people or stakeholders that you would think of, but we also have current students from a variety of places who wanted to come forward with a lot of different backgrounds, not just cultural, but in relationship to gender and sexuality and all kinds of issues, or things that we're trying to tackle together, as well as community members and experts. And now we have these subcommittees, and people chose what they wanted to do, but that for us was the first step in really saying, like, we recognize that we're not doing this well, or maybe to the fullest potential that we could be doing it, and we want to get better, and we want to learn. And so to the question, I think being able to be really open, and to say, invite a conversation, but we have to support educators as well, because this isn't the kind of thing or the kind of topic where we can say, let's bring in a speaker and we will, learn about cultural sensitivity, and mindfulness, and then we'll all do it this year and we'll be perfect at it. This is, really roll up the sleeves work that we need to get in and we need to do together, and we need to have it needs to be ongoing, and we need to have really a view of looking at this. We talk about climate and culture, and climate can change relatively quickly, but culture changes over a much longer period of time. And so really knowing that there's a deep commitment to this, not just in the immediate, but in the long view as well, and being very intentional about that. So I really appreciate the question. I don't have a lot of answers, but I'm right there learning and growing, and appreciate it continually being put on the radar that we need to do better.
A quote that I really appreciated from that I read from Brene Brown is something along the lines of, not word for word, but something along the lines of when being able to bring our full identities into the room is only reserved for the most privileged, we really miss out on creating the schools that we want and that we dream of. And so for me, what I know to be true is that this is an inward journey. We can't expect competence from adults unless we have done our own work, and that's true for mindfulness as well. But educators really need to be able to be provided the opportunities to do their work around bias and prejudice and racism, and really look at how, when our identities are not able to be brought into the room safely, or we feel like there's identities of ours that we have to, and for young people, have to put on the back burner in order to show up in a classroom, that we're really interfering with the full ability of young people to learn and see themselves in the world, and learn from others that are not like them. And so the time is now, in my opinion. We're past due in education to really come to the table fully in this way, where we're doing our own work and we're going on our own journey of discovery around identity and the topics of privilege and power and race and class and all the other isms, because it's on our children's minds, and they're coming to school with the lived experiences of this. And for us to shy away from this is really, in my opinion, doing a disservice to young people in the full scope of how they learn and how they're able to learn as their full selves.
And I don't have much to add to that, because I agree wholeheartedly. And I just think, don't forget, give the students a voice on this. You know, they come with, they come having struggled with their identities and having understood what it was like to have their identity not shown in their environment, not shared in their classroom, even in their whole school. So there are a huge amount of students who feel that very acutely and who can articulate that so well. So make sure in all of this discussion that the student voice is included, because there's a lot of learning to come from that.
Okay, we are coming up on our time frame. However, we did want to ask one last question before we before we go. So we've talked a bit about mindfulness strategies. We've talked a bit about strategies in general for the home and keeping a routine and things like that. So in your tenure in education in general, what strategies have you found successful in the classroom or in the home?
Um, well, you guys, you all know me. So my strategies have been part of my life for more than half my life, which scares me to say. Um, you know, breathe, move, rest strategies work. Neuroscience tells us that, research tells us that, medicine tells us that. We know, keep it simple, repeat the strategies. They don't need to be complicated, they don't need to be complex. They just need to be about us. Whether we're an adult or a young learner or an older student, they just need to be about us, taking time for us, right? Showing some compassion to ourselves, so showing some compassion to others, but just taking a few minutes out of your day to prioritize you. I often look at teachers' to-do lists. I look at students' to-do lists in high school, and the educator is almost never on their own to-do list, and funnily enough, neither is the student. You write all these lists of things you have to do, and I look and your name's not there. You know, the educator's name's not there. So it's time to put you at top of the list. Number one priority is you finding something that resonates with you so that you can nurture yourself. Right now, more than ever, we really need to be nurturing ourselves. And whatever strategies you find for those, just make sure they're simple. Make sure they're sustainable. You don't need it, nothing too big. We're not looking for big here. Just simple and effective strategies that work for you, whether you're adult or child. And try and stick with them. Try and be consistent where you can.
Yeah, I think in my tenure as an educator and also my time as a parent, I reiterate what Jill just said: is keep it simple. And to me, it's less about the tools or how perfectly you implement them. It's all about the environment and the space that you provide. You know, being genuine, what being, you, like Alicia shared, as being a parent, and it's messy, and then the important part is cleaning up the mess. I think that's true for all of us. We're human beings. So it's having the environment that is conducive to I'm going to pull a Miss Frizzle here, but to, making mistakes and getting messy, and knowing that we are there for one another, and that those relationships are foundational, and that, even if it gets messy, that I'm still there for you, and that genuine commitment, and the environment of safety and openness is there. And then some simple tools layered in on top of that, I think it does amazing things for all involved.
The thing that I will say in my tenure that has made the most difference, while I could look at anything, any piece of content or skill that I've been able to teach young people, I know it's not in that has been the most meaningful. I know that it has been in the relationships, in those moment to moment opportunities to connect with young people, that has made the difference as an educator for me, and why I still have connections with students that are now married and have their own children, and I'm sure the same is true for Kimberly, because we really value young people, we value their voices. And when young people walk away from adults feeling like they're seen and like they're heard, I think that's the best thing we could ever do, in connection to and in relationship with young people. I would also say, in addition to that, is making sure that young people know that you care. There's a quote: "People want to know that you care before they care what you know," and it's really a quote that I'm reminded of every day when I make connections with people. Is that it doesn't matter what I know. What is important that the people that I serve and the young people that I serve and have served know that I care about them, and that is the best thing I could ever give anybody.
Yeah, thank you very much for, all of these strategies and insight we can put into the way that we care for our children and for ourselves, right? Which is something that we brought up quite often. So now I wanted to transition to Chern to finish off tonight and not hold you too long, as for many on the East Coast it is approaching on dinner time. So we will leave you at that after transitioning to our final moderator.
Yes, thank you, Kabir. Yeah, it is getting kind of late. So yeah, so I guess just first a big thank you to um, all of the audience that is watching right now. Thank you for giving your time, and thank you for being such an amazing audience, just in the chat and experiencing and discussing and learning with us all these different strategies and how parents can support students, students can support parents, and just building this environment and this community where everybody supports everybody else, because it is truly a team effort between everybody in order for any of this to work. And so before we go, let me quickly share some contact information and social media, because if you have any questions or any concerns, please do feel free to reach out to any of us. And also, this is the second webinar in our series of webinars. So do stay tuned for our third webinar. That should be coming up next year in January or maybe February. And also, while this is up, is there anything that anybody else would like to add, or maybe something to promote?
I just want to thank you all again. I'm so grateful that I have had the privilege to know you for so many years now, and for your incredible advocacy and the way that you use your voice on behalf of others, and in education. And that you model and exemplify so much of this work in your day-to-day lives, and I just can't thank you enough. And it's always an honor and a privilege to get to work with you all in any capacity.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that you're an absolute inspiration to young people all over the country. I know when you joined us recently for a webinar, the sort of conversation around what you're doing and how hard you work and strive for this topic of student mental health is nothing short of incredible. So thank you to you for this opportunity. Thank you to you for your courage and your bravery and your dedication.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to all of the panelists for coming and joining us today. And I guess just being there for us, whenever we need wisdom or just someone to talk to and someone to know.
I would second and third that sentiment. It's been an amazing privilege of mine to watch you all grow into the leaders that you are. I can't wait to say I knew them when, because I know that you all are going to not stop after you graduate from school. That you'll continue to do the work that is your passion and is meaningful and healing. And so the world needs more healers, and to have you all be part of that solution is, it's a privilege to do this work alongside of you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so I think.
Yeah, so if you ever have any questions, you can always go to, you can either contact one of our student groups, or you can always contact one of the one of our panelists if they you have something that refers to their expertise, right? So on that slide, you will find their contact information as well in the description of this video, so you'll be able to come to them if you have any questions for them. So we thank all of you for coming tonight, and thank you very much to our panelists as well for being such wonderful guests and giving such wonderful insight to all of our audience. And with that, we wish all of you good night.